All right, welcome back. We are going to cover psychosocial development in adolescence, uh, puberty through emerging adulthood. Okay, so I thought I'd start with Erikson today instead of ending the chapter with him, because there's such a powerful stage going on during adolescence, and I think most of us can remember and really relate to the search for identity. So some of you may still be in this stage. Some of you may have passed through it and can easily remember the factors. Adolescence, according to this model, is going to be from 12 to 19 years of age. But Erikson said that we struggle with the search for identity through our 20s. Usually it's going to be resolved at some point in our 20s. He says the big conflict in this stage is between developing a solid identity versus dwelling in confusion about who we are, what we value, what kind of person we want to be. If we can resolve it on the positive side, we're left with the virtue of fidelity. So this is the first stage where we're going to actually resolve it with a virtue that's going to make us better capable of making solid social relationships, friends and romantic partners. So you can tell that his model is taking us from trying to become our best selves and developing confidence and all those things, to being a person who can start to interact with other people, form pair bonds and things like that. So there are some gender differences that have been argued for in how we seek our identities. According to Erikson, males must resolve their identity conflict before they can confront the next major stage conflict, which is that of forming an intimate relationship. So Erikson feels like if you don't, he actually didn't say males. Let me clarify that. He said you, like people. If people are not solid in their identity before they attempt to form an intimate bond, then the intimate bond is going to have a rougher pattern where the person, it may end up disrupted. He said, those relationships where people feel like they've grown apart, he feels like the explanation is going to be that they didn't really know who they were before they entered into the relationship. Okay, so that's what he said. He just said people. But later researchers have argued that that might be true for males, and a lot of research has actually kind of focused in on why males are on average older when they settle down with a relationship and things like that than females are. So a lot of interest has been placed in this possible idea that maybe it's true that males need to form a strong identity before they're ready for intimacy. And then a researcher named Carol Gilligan, studied females. She was a professor at Wellesley College, which was an all-female school, and she examined their search for identity, the stability of their relationships and things like that. And what she found is that it may not be true that females need to resolve their identity conflict altogether before they can successfully enter into an intimate relationship. She found that females often reported that they got part of their identity from their intimate relationships. When I first read Carol Gilligan's theory, I thought what she was saying was that women get part of their identity from being able to say, my husband's a doctor, or something like that. And I felt like it was a little sexist. In fact, I had to flip back to the beginning of the article to find out if maybe the author was male, because I thought, it sounds a little sexist. But she went on to mention that women oftentimes save a little bit of their identity to be identified through who their spouse ends up being, like what kind of person they choose to be in a lifelong relationship with. And also part of it to be defined by their kids, how their children turn out, and what kind of people they raise. And so her interpretation was that identity manifests itself a little bit differently for males versus females. She thought that males put a lot more of their identity in what kind of job they have, how well they do in their job, and how, the respect they get in those areas. And females put a lot more emphasis on their relationships and what kind of people they spend time with and how their friends and their loved ones regard them, how their kids turn out. So a possibility that there might be gender differences on that. Another area of research that has spawned out of Erikson's idea that we search for identities during adolescence is research by Marcia, who this turns out to be a male. So the person named Gilligan is female, and then the person named Marcia is male. He came up with the idea of identity statuses because Erikson said that it was normal for us to be struggling in role confusion, trying to figure out who we are and what we value, up through the 20s. And then Marcia said, well, there are some people who look like they've settled their identity, but they aren't really as settled and having resolved it on the positive side and ready to have fidelity and like that, because maybe their identity wasn't really searched for. So Marcia really made an argument that an important component of the search for identity is the search. So here's what he basically said. We've got two continua here. We've got the commitment to no commitment continuum, and then we've got the no exploration continuum. And so Marcia said Erikson was just looking at the commitment continuum and not really considering whether the person went through an exploration and settled on their own identity independently. Like, do they feel like they really selected their identity? So here's what Marcia thought. There are 4 different types of searches that a person might go through and levels of commitment. So for example, foreclosure. If a person has resolved the conflict without really ever considering any other options, well, obviously I'm going to go to college, and never really thought about anything else because it's just not really my choice. It's sort of just what you do. Take over the family shoe store. This is just what you do. Marcia said that that was not as solid of an identity because the person didn't have to go through the exploration phase and really feel like they struggled with their identity. Identity achievement, on the other hand, that also, you have a strong commitment to your identity, but this one was delivered through exploration. So you consider your options. I could go to college, or I could go to the military, or I could work for a while. If I go to college, I could pick an applied major and graduate and immediately start working. Or I could pick like a content major and then possibly end up going to grad school, right? Like, you think of all the things that you might want to do vocationally. You think about, do I want to be the kind of person who, is athletic and runs around and exercises a lot, or do I want to be the kind of person who is artistic and spends a lot of time making art, appreciating art, and maybe appreciating music, or do I want to be the kind of person who has a lot of friends that I spend a lot of different time with and go to parties and things like that, or do I want to be the kind of person who has a couple of friends and we're much more intimate, we really know each other super well? Like, all those kinds of things would be part of what the person's exploring. So going through that process of trying out things and exploring, he thought was really important. And this is something that Erikson really offered, is that during adolescence, we try out things that we probably are not going to lifelong be interested in. Like I said in the last video, I always tell my students, think back to 7th and 8th grade. I usually get a moan out of that because they're like, I hated 7th and 8th. But think back to that time and think about who you were friends with back then, who maybe you never really spent time with after those years. Like, maybe you were only friends because you were, for example, I had a friend in middle school who apparently we were quite tight. I don't even remember her really that well, but she wrote in my 8th grade yearbook, what great friends we were and how much fun we have together, and all effusive, how much we love each other and all these things. And seriously, when I saw what was written, I thought, who is that? And then I looked her up and I was like, oh, that's right, we had gym class together. And so apparently we really bonded over volleyball and whatever we were assigned to do in gym class. And I literally do not even remember her at the high school. I don't remember her at all, but we were such good friends in 8th grade. it's really common to try people out, try activities out. Go back and look at the hobbies or the extracurriculars that you participated in 8th grade and see if there aren't things there that you never did again, right? Like maybe you were in Glee, or maybe you ran track, or maybe you did, some kind of 4-H activity that you never did again. You just did it because your friends were doing it, or it sounded kind of fun. Erikson would say you were trying things out, trying to figure out what kind of person you're going to be. And Marcia said that if you were going through that path and trying to figure things out, that's called achievement. You were exploring and you were deciding. Now down here on the no commitment side, if you have a person who has not committed to an identity and they're not really exploring, he said that you're in the diffusion phase. So maybe you decided to drop out of school, or you decided, I'll just take a job flipping burgers. It'll all work out. It's no big deal. I'm not going to worry about it. So you're not putting any effort into the question, and you're not worried about it at all, and that would be diffusion. A moratorium is where you say, you know what, I'm not ready to commit. There's so many options out there. I'll just take a job for now, and I'll work here for a while, and then, hopefully I'll figure it out later. Ultimately planning on exploring, ultimately open to different experiences. So gender differences. According to Marcia, it's really important for males to go through the achievement version at least be on the exploration side of this chart. So you want to ultimately achieve your identity through achievement, maybe having taken a moratorium along the way, but ultimately achieving your identity on your own. Whereas he thought that it was not as bad for females to possibly have gone through foreclosure, to feel like they were on a path, and maybe they chose it, maybe they didn't, they're not really sure possibly, but having an identity that you didn't really have to struggle for, he thought was not as harmful for females as it was for males. So you can kind of see in both Erikson and Marcia this idea that males have to sort of figure it out and settle on their identity. This is a very Western European attitude, very Western idea that males have to figure it out for themselves and come out on the other side being their own man. So that's kind of where these guys are coming from. All right, how about sexual identity? There is a lot of masturbation going on during adolescence, and so adolescents have this, burgeoning interest in sex, and we've talked already about teenage pregnancy and things like that. But I just thought I'd throw it out that we've been trying in the field of sex education for about the past 30 years to try and encourage kids to be more comfortable with masturbation and less driven to feel like they have to have a partner to express their sexual urges, and that we may have been making some headway because kids are reporting higher rates of masturbation than they did even 30 years ago. So maybe it's helping. But sexual orientation tends to reveal itself somewhere around puberty, sometime in adolescence. The most common time for people to realize their sexual orientation one way or another is when they start having their first romantic attractions. And of course, there's puppy love kinds of attractions that happen prior to puberty. And what a lot of people don't realize is that everybody during the puppy love phase has times when they're romantically attracted to somebody of their same sex, and it really doesn't have any predictive relationship to what sexual orientation the person will have later. Really what's most telling is the attractions that they have after puberty. And the attractions can be sexual attractions, they could be romantic attractions. Either way, we start to figure out whether we're attracted to people of our same sex, the other sex, both sexes, whatever. So it's usually expressed in adolescence, and the person first has to recognize for themselves who they're attracted to, and then they start to realize how they're feeling. I thought it'd be interesting to talk about the determinants of sexual orientation, and I teach human sexuality, so I can't not talk a little bit about this, because psychology oftentimes gets labeled as maybe holding attitudes that are really very Freudian. Freud had a belief that sexual orientation is a reflection of whether you identified with your parent of the same sex or not. And that's not where most psychologists are. We don't think that's what determines sexual orientation. We mostly think it's biology. we looked to research on animals. Like out in the wild, 8% of mountain goats are pair bonded with somebody of their same sex. Albatross, who form lifelong pair bonds. There are cases where it goes up, the rates of lesbian pairs, and it's more common when there aren't enough males, and the lesbian albatross will mate with each other for life. They'll make nests together, they'll lay eggs in the nest, and of course without having fertilized them, then the eggs don't hatch, but they'll be committed for life. And that's evidence that in animals there's variation. Now with regard to homosexual behavior, gay acts are common in porpoises. In fact, if you look on the internet, you can just Google, gay porpoises, and there are videos of porpoises in the wild with erections rubbing it up against each other, and it might be really a way to increase pod cohesion. It's a way of showing that the males aren't threats to each other. They aren't really pair bonding like in the other two cases. They seem to just be engaging in acts that look kind of like they're attracted to each other. And then there is the case of the penguins where the zoo brought in a male to mate with the females because the male that was there was not successful in mating with the females. So they brought a male in, and then the male eschewed the females and settled down with the male who was already there, and so they still are looking for somebody to impregnate their females. But the two guys are pretty happy and chose each other even when they had options that were not only offered to them, but were encouraged. They chose each other. So it seems like maybe they were biologically designed that way. So when we see it in animals, it makes it seem like it's natural, because things that happen in animals are not going to be learned on TV or other ways. Prenatal hormones is another biological basis. I've got this video linked in our Canvas classroom that explains how testosterone exposure might be a factor in determining our sexual orientation. Generally, males in the womb will secrete testosterone during certain periods of gestation, and females will not. But sometimes the male will not secrete testosterone. Sometimes the female will have testosterone coming out of her adrenal glands, and these factors might play a role in how the brain develops. And that brings up brain issues, which I'll talk about in a second. But one thing that comes up in that video is it talks about the 2D, 4D ratio. If you think of your index finger as your second finger, your second digit, that would be the 2D. And then your ring finger being your fourth finger or your fourth digit, that's the 4D. We're interested in the ratio of the length of the index finger towards the ring finger. So here on the left, we see the pattern that's really common for straight men, a ring finger that's longer than the index finger. And this is also seen more commonly in lesbians than among straight women. And then on the right, we see the pattern that's more common for straight women, which is having an index finger longer than the ring finger. And then for gay men, this is a more common pattern than we see among straight men. So I mean, your finger length does not determine your sexual orientation. But what we're thinking is that exposure to testosterone in the womb can determine body changes, like the length of your ring finger relative to your index finger, and also can affect brain structures. And so let's talk a little bit about brain. Here we have a zoom in of a cross section of the brain, and we're looking on the bottom here at part of your hypothalamus. And there's a particular area of the hypothalamus called the INAH3 nucleus. And in that nucleus are cells that are thought to play a role in sexual motivation. So they started with animal models, and they found that across animals, the males in the species tend to have a bigger INAH3, more densely packed with neurons, than the females of the species do. And then they discovered in humans that's the same basic pattern. Then they started looking at men and women who were attracted to men and men and women who were attracted to women. And what they found is that if you're attracted to men, you tend to have a smaller INAH3. And if you're attracted to women, you tend to have a bigger INAH3, regardless of your sex. if your INAH3 is big, you tend to be attracted to women, and if it's small, you tend to be attracted to men. So this particular nucleus might be affected by exposure to testosterone. Could be genetic. We're not sure. Twin studies kind of underscore the idea of a genetic association with sexual orientation. In these studies, what you're seeing is on the left, Hamer was the first study, and then Hu, Sanders, and Rice each did their own replications of the study. And on the far right, there's the combination, just the average of the pattern across the 4 studies. What they were looking at is twins, pairs of twin males, where at least one of the brothers was identified as gay. The other brother, they weren't concerned about the sexual orientation to start off with. So they collected DNA from them and analyzed the X chromosome that they all carry, and they specifically looked at the Q28 allele on the X gene. And they found that in the brothers where both of them were gay, they tended to share the pattern on this XQ28 allele. In the pairs where one was gay and the other one wasn't, they tended not to share that coding. So sexual orientation might be determined on that XQ28 allele, at least for men. They haven't found anything like this for females, but females have 2 X's, and so it gets a lot murkier. If it's going to be something on the X chromosome, it's going to be harder to explain female sexual orientation using the X chromosome. What about monozygotic twins versus dizygotic twins? So here we have what we call concordance rates between twins. So concordance rates mean how often the twins match on their sexual orientation. So on the far left bar, we see it says if identical twins. So they're referring to brothers of gay men. So one person, one of the men in the twin pair was, or one of the men in the brother pair was gay. What's the likelihood that the other one also was? So if your identical twin brother is gay, there's a 52% chance that you also are gay. If your fraternal twin brother is gay, there's a 22% chance that you're also gay. So you'll notice that with 100% of genes in common, the identical twins are a lot more similar to each other than the fraternal twins who share only 50% of their genes in common. But clearly, sexual orientation is not purely a genetically determined outcome because if it was, then the identical twins would be 100% matching on sexual orientation. So there's got to be something else besides just genes. But this shows us that it's got a lot of genetic component to it. On the right, you see the same patterns for girls, for women, and it's a little less predictive, a little less match between the sisters, but it's the same pattern. You're seeing that identical twins are more similar to each other than fraternal twins, and they're both much more similar than people who were adopted into the same household and raised, in the same environment. So twin studies are underscoring the biological aspect. And then there are brother studies. This is going to sound really weird, so follow with me, but they got together people who were either homosexual in the black bars or heterosexual in the white bars. And they asked them, how many, in the left case, older brothers do you have? Or in the next bar over, how many older sisters do you have? How many younger brothers do you have? How many younger sisters do you have? And what you see is that the homosexual men reported much higher rates of older brothers and older sisters. And the heterosexual men reported more instances of younger brothers and younger sisters. And you might be thinking to yourself, something social as an interpretation. But what the researchers concluded is that when mom is carrying a pregnancy, her body sees that pregnancy as an invader. It's not 100% her genes, and so the body wants to attack it. So that's why it's in its own amniotic sac and mostly protected from mom. But mom makes antigens against that DNA. So when another pregnancy occurs, her antigens are already ready and ready to start interfering with the development of the developing fetus. And so when there are more older siblings, either brothers or sisters, the mom's body may be primed and ready to start attacking the developing fetus. And it could be at the level of the placenta that there is some kind of interference that might cause stress to the fetus. It's not really clear what the mechanism is, but it seems to be more pronounced when the preceding pregnancies were male and the current person that we're questioning is male than when the preceding pregnancies were female. So there might be something about the Y chromosome that sort of primes mom's body to sort of retaliate. Now, don't use finger links or anything like that to try and question what your sexual orientation is. A lot of times in my classes, students will be looking at their fingers. They'll be saying, but I'm the 8th of 8 children. What is this saying about me? Nothing, because you'll notice the bars aren't 100% one way or the other, right? There are variations. There's got to be something other than just pure biology at play here. But biology seems to be our best explanation for determining whether we're attracted to males or we're attracted to females or we're attracted to both. All right, so we've got our sexual identity. The sexual revolution, a lot of people think that it happened in the 1960s, but it really started in 1920. There was a little bit of sort of regression during the 40s and 50s, and then it came back out in the 60s. So today, there's a lot more liberation and more freedom to do a lot of different things. It's really interesting, though, because modern adolescents have probably less freedom to be alone with their potential romantic partners than their parents' generation probably had. So we're having a little bit of a regression again, where we're seeing a little less freedom going on among adolescents. All right, how about the social aspects of personality development? Here we have a nice mom talking to her daughter because, you know, relationships with parents are really important during adolescence. Unfortunately, a lot of parents think, oh, thank goodness, they're finally teenagers. I can start giving them more freedom. I can start letting them, you know, they can drive, they can do stuff on their own. I can finally just kind of relax a little bit. But it turns out this is a period of time when parents need to be even more accessible. They have to change their demeanor, though. Parents who think that they can tell their kids what to do are going to run up against some struggle in adolescence. Parents who, on the other hand, think that their role is to help their kids to work through their concerns or whatever their issues are at the moment. Parents who take that perspective tend to be a lot more successful with their teenagers and get their teenagers to open up and maybe accept advice and things like that. For most families, most interactions between teens and their parents are positive. Of course there's going to be conflict. I mean, of course there's going to be conflict. When kids were littler, there was conflict. It's just that, you know, parents had the final say on everything and they could, you know, sort of lower the boom on little kids. By adolescence, you have a person who has better verbal skills, who can yell back and slam doors, and their attempts to get their way will take a different form now. Instead of screaming and throwing themselves on the floor, they might make dramatic statements, or they might sneak out, or they might do, you know, things like that. But it's a lot of the same exact motivation. They feel like they're not being heard, or they want something and they feel like they're being thwarted. So most of the time, it's a positive relationship. It's a little bit ambivalent because on the one hand, parents want to give their children more freedom. They're growing up. They're getting more independent. But on the other hand, they want to protect their kids from something bad happening. Meanwhile, on the kids' side of the argument, the kids want more freedom. They don't want to be told what to do. But then sometimes they're really scared and don't know what to do, and they really would love somebody to tell them what to do. So it's a kind of ambivalent on both sides. You know, and a lot of times, just when the kid is finally reaching out and saying, I need you to help me with this, the parent is on their, okay, I got to let them do what they want. You know, they need to figure this out for themselves mode. And so sometimes there can be like this push and pull where neither is really getting their needs met, and it seems like they're in discord when they both are really wanting the same kind of outcome. So this need to break away on the teens' part, but they're also still scared, and they are very dependent. You know, during the teen years, absolutely till they graduate high school, they tend to be very dependent. And then a lot of kids will get into emerging adulthood and still be at home independent. So it's scary. It's a scary time. You want your independence, but you also are scared. It turns out that moms are the target of conflict a lot more often than dads are, and it might be in part because moms have more ongoing sort of drudgery-like interactions with their kids. Also, moms ask stuff more often or tell their kids things or have expectations that get unfulfilled. And so the conflict, arises periodically when mom says, I asked you to do that thing and I asked you 4 times. And whereas dads oftentimes don't have those day-to-day kinds of telling them what to do and things like that. As dads are becoming more and more active in child rearing, though, this little statistic might change. The good news for most parents is that if you take parents and put them in one room and put the kids in another room and give them a Kohlberg morality test, or you ask them, give them a survey about what they really value the most, you can tell that these kids were parented by those parents. They share very basic values about what's important, what's meaningful, how they should spend their time, things like that. So parents can take a little bit of credit and they can kind of relax a little bit if they realize, they've done a lot of laying of groundwork, and that, the struggles they might be at the moment having with their teens are just a symptom of, growth and development. As always, authoritative parenting seems to really pay off, by having given kids options and opportunities as they were growing up to make small decisions. They're better equipped in adolescence to make good choices when the potential harm is really big. So authoritative parenting is definitely the way to end up with children who can make good decisions even when they're out of mom and dad's control. All right, now my last point I wanted to raise had to do with people your own age, siblings, for example. In adolescence, once the kids are all in adolescence, in American families, most families don't have that many children anymore. And so a lot of times they'll be in that same basic age bracket and they start to see each other as equals. They're no longer, you're the baby and I'm the grown-up one. They start to see each other more equally. However, they tend to be more distant than they were when they were kids and more, sort of entrenched in each other's lives. In adolescence, people take up different hobbies. They start doing different things with their time. And so they may not spend that much time together. With peers, they start to get much more important. And you'll just have to memorize that amazing fact that I'm telling you there, because, peers, the relationship with peers becomes much more intense. There's this sort of betrayal if somebody tells your secret, and you're not supposed to pass things around. You're supposed to support your friend even if they've made a really stupid decision that you disagree with. You're supposed to be supportive. You absolutely do not ever include adults in what's going on, even if every fiber in your being is saying we should tell somebody what's going on. Nope, you cannot do that. Adolescent relationships get much more intimate with their friends. They start to share things, tell each other their secrets, and things like that, much more intimate. So it's no longer just whoever's around is my friend. It's seriously, we put our friends through sort of litmus tests to determine whether they're really loyal to us and things like that. So during our search for identity, we're looking for fidelity from other people, that's for sure. The benefits of having peers, it turns out that when a person has one friend who they feel is legitimately their friend, it boosts their self-esteem and increases their likelihood of school success. You don't have to have a wide circle of friends and be Mr. or Mrs. Popularity. One good, solid friend is all a kid really needs. More friends can be potentially beneficial. It can also potentially be harmful to have a whole bunch of friends. So, but one good, solid friend seems to be an advantage. Girls who have at least one good solid friend tend to have better relationships with their moms than girls who don't have any good solid friends, girls who feel isolated. So there may be something that moms teach or some kind of competence that moms convey or something that allows girls to make that kind of pair bond sort of friendship with at least one good reliable friend. course, we're always worried about peer pressure. The idea that our children's peers are going to get them to do something that they wouldn't normally do or wouldn't otherwise do. It turns out peers are most influential on stylistic things like hand gestures or what clothing to wear or how to wear your hair or how to talk. I mean, think about how adolescents talk compared to their parents. I'll take you down a walk through history of the word said. Apparently, at least according to my parents, when they were adolescents, the correct word for said was said. So if they wanted to tell a story, they might say, I said to my friend, do you want to go to the park? And my friend said, no thanks. And they were endlessly frustrated with me when I was a kid because in my peer group, we said go. So I would say, to tell that same story, I would say, so I go to my friend, do you want to go to the park? My friend goes, no thanks. And that just drove my parents to distraction that we use such an incorrect word. By the time I started teaching college, students had started using like instead of said. So I'm like, I'm like, do you want to go to the park? My friend's like, no thanks. And then there was this period of time when the students were using all like. So I'm all like, do you want to go to the park? My friend's all like, no thanks. I think like is persisting. I think like is still the correct form of the verb said, I think. But it's kind of interesting how much influence peers have on these kinds of stylistic things that really will help to distinguish visibly and superficially the difference between one generation and the next. Language is a really good way to keep people separate. The important things that parents need to remember is that parents are much more influential on the basic values, the things that are really going to stick with kids throughout their life. So the importance of work, or the importance of having kids, or the importance of going to church or worshiping, whatever it is. So the parents have the big influence, and the peers have like stylistic things that can really help to identify one generation from the next. All right, well, that concludes psychosocial development. So I guess I will see you guys in emerging adulthood next.